Hi, I'm John Maxwell. When the top companies in the world are looking for trainers, speakers, and coaches, there's one name that stands above the rest, and that's Maxwell Leadership. Our certified team members have gotten proven results for companies all over the globe, and our reputation, I'm proud to say, is second to none. Some of our members have risen to the top of their profession, including the one you're going to meet today. I proudly introduce you to my friend Bob Fabian Zinka.
Welcome to the Leadership and Success Podcast with your host, Coach BZ, where we help you lead with purpose and succeed with impact. If you're ready to grow into the kind of leader others want to follow, this podcast is for you. If you're determined to elevate your success and leave a lasting legacy, this podcast is for you. As my mentor, Dr. John C. Maxwell reminds us, everything rises and falls on leadership. Our goal is simple: to inspire you, challenge you, and equip you with insights that can transform the trajectory of your leadership journey. Welcome aboard to another episode of the Leadership and Success Podcast with Coach BZ.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. This is Coach Busy, and we are going to have a special edition of the Leadership and Success podcast today. We are going to be talking about an article I wrote about the Gettysburg Address. And I think there is a lot of leadership lesson to be learned by President Abraham Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. It's not that long, the speech itself. It was less than 3 minutes long, but there is so much to learn about our country and about the country we are trying to become. So before I start with the podcast on my article, let me know, where are you guys joining us from? What city, what state? And if you are outside of the US, which country? Let me know what you are grateful for today. And also, if you have a question for me, type it in the comment. The podcast itself, I think, will be about 40 minutes long today. All right. Like we normally do for those who follow the podcast, I like to start with what we call a moment of gratitude. This is where we take a moment every single time we meet just to be grateful, right? And part of the reason why we do this is because in the military, it's about 22 service members and veterans who commit suicide every single day in this country. So we want to make sure we are grateful every day, because it's not possible to be grateful and to be suicidal at the very same time. So if you would maybe close your eyes and put yourself in your happy place and think about one thing you are grateful for right now. Really, I can't help this, but since Juneteenth this year, every single day, I've been so grateful for freedom. Freedom, freedom, freedom. I truly believe that God made us to be free. There is nothing more important, I think, to human life than to experience and to live in freedom. And for those who followed these shows for a while, or who have read some of my article, you know that it's my opinion that slavery was the gravest crime against humanity. And that's exactly how America started on July 4th, 1776. About a fifth of the American population was under bondage. And that's just not acceptable. But I'm so glad that as time progresses, our country is trying to close the gap between our ideal and the America we were all meant to be, which is freedom for everyone, including African American, and including women too, and everybody else that is part of this country, of this heritage. So I am grateful for that freedom, and I am grateful that I was able to wake up today, because as long as I have breath, there is hope for me. So let me know in the chat what you are grateful for. All right, I am going to go now and start the podcast. It's going to be about 40 minutes or so. And you should find the link to the full article in the description of the event on both LinkedIn and YouTube. Here we go.
77 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty, and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. We are met on a great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who here gave their lives that that nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here have consecrated it, far above our poor power to add or detract. The world will little note nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. It is for us, the living, rather to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion, that we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth.
So, if you think back to November of 1863, the most famous, highly respected orator in America stood in a field in Pennsylvania.
Right, Edward Everett.
Exactly. And he spoke for 2 straight hours. I mean, 2 solid hours of classical references, topographical analysis, just soaring rhetoric.
And, well, nobody remembers a single word he said.
Not one word. But then, right after him, a man with a, slightly squeaky voice stood up and spoke 272 words in under 3 minutes.
Yeah, and fundamentally rewrote the moral foundation of the United States.
It's just wild. So today, we are looking at how to lead when the world is quite literally on fire. Welcome to the deep dive.
We're so glad you're joining us.
Yeah, we are jumping into a stack of notes and historical sources today that offer an absolute masterclass in extreme crisis leadership.
Truly a masterclass.
So our mission today is to unpack a deeply fascinating article written by Bob Fabian Zinga. He actually goes by BZ. He's a U.S. Navy information warfare commander and a cybersecurity executive. And he wrote this piece titled America 250, Leadership Lessons from the Gettysburg Address.
And to really get into the mechanics of his argument, his notes pull heavily from 2 monumental books.
Yeah, which we've got right here.
Right. The first is Gary Wills's Pulitzer-winning book, Lincoln at Gettysburg, The Words That Remade America. And the second is Edward E. Baptist's incredibly, just paradigm-shifting book, The Half Has Never Been Told, Slavery and the Making of American Capitalism.
It is a remarkable synthesis of sources for us to go through with you today.
It really is, because we are taking the strict operational perspective of modern military leadership, and we're layering it over 19th century constitutional theory.
Which sounds intense, but it makes so much sense when you see it.
Absolutely. And then grounding it all in the brutal economic realities of early American capitalism. What Zinga does in this article is strip away that mythologized marble statue version of Abraham Lincoln.
Right, the guy in the pen.
Yeah, exactly. Instead, he looks at him as a chief executive managing a failing enterprise during literally the worst crisis in its history. Great leaders, as Zinga argues, don't just manage processes.
They manufacture meaning.
Exactly. They provide meaning. And they do it when the stakes are at their absolute highest.
Okay, let's unpack this, because whether you are, say, managing a cybersecurity team dealing with a catastrophic data breach, or running a boardroom in a completely volatile market, or just trying to navigate your own chaotic sphere of influence, the lessons here on clarity, purpose, and institutional stewardship are profoundly actionable.
They apply to almost every level of leadership today.
They really do. This isn't just about what happened in 1863. It is about the mechanics of how human beings respond to authority, to vision, and frankly, to trauma.
To understand the mechanics of that communication, we really have to look at the psychological state of the audience Lincoln was addressing.
Yeah, set the scene for us a bit.
Well, you just cannot appreciate the surgical precision of the Gettysburg Address without understanding the sheer scale of the exhaustion and grief that was paralyzing the American public in November of 1863.
Let's put some numbers to that grief, because the scale is almost impossible for a modern mind to process.
It really is staggering.
The Battle of Gettysburg took place in July of 1863. Over just 3 days of fighting, there were over 50,000 casualties.
Okay, 50,000.
Men killed, wounded, or missing. In one single battle. The nation wasn't just grieving, it was drowning in trauma.
And the country was violently divided. The war had dragged on for years with no clear end in sight, and the Northern public was fundamentally exhausted.
People are openly questioning if preserving the Union was even worth the river of blood it was costing.
Exactly. And that level of fatigue creates a very specific challenge for a leader. When Lincoln received the invitation to deliver a few appropriate remarks at the dedication of the Soldiers' National Cemetery, he had every excuse to give a traditional wartime speech.
Like a standard political stump speech.
Right. The conventional political playbook dictated that he should talk about military strategy. He could have given a tactical breakdown of General Meade's troop movements.
Or focused entirely on vilifying the Confederate Army.
Yeah, or justified his administration's spending.
Yeah.
Could have leaned heavy into logistics.
But leaning into logistics when people are traumatized is a leadership failure. When people are that uncertain, they don't need to hear about process.
No, they don't.
They need to be reconnected to the purpose. They need to know why all this suffering actually matters.
And Lincoln realized that if he talked about tactics, he would just sound like another politician justifying a war. He had to elevate the entire conflict into a question of human existence.
Which brings us back to the contrast we mentioned at the very beginning. The featured speaker that day was Edward Everett.
And Everett was considered the absolute greatest orator of his generation.
Oh, his resume was insane. Former U.S. Senator, Governor of Massachusetts, Secretary of State, President of Harvard.
He was a rock star of public speaking back then.
Totally. And he delivered exactly what the 19th century public expected, a sweeping 2-hour, academically rigorous funeral oration.
Right. He detailed the movements of the armies. He compared the fallen to the heroes of ancient Greece. It was complex. It was verbose.
And it was entirely forgettable.
Completely forgettable.
And then Lincoln steps to the front of the platform, and he delivers just 10 sentences, 272 words.
Less than 3 minutes of speaking.
Yeah. And Zinga looks at this contrast, and he coins a term for it that I think, honestly, every manager should write on a sticky note. He calls it the Gettysburg constraint.
What's fascinating here is that the Gettysburg constraint is just a brilliant framing. Zinga points out that leaders, whether they're sitting in a military command center or a corporate boardroom, they constantly confuse talking more with communicating better.
Oh, absolutely.
There is this deeply ingrained assumption that if a problem is complex, the explanation of the solution must also be complex and long-winded.
Like if I talk for an hour, I must really understand this.
Exactly. But Zinga argues that this is actually a symptom of a leader who hasn't mastered the material. The ability to distill a massive existential mission into a simple, digestible concept is the ultimate proof of comprehension.
This maps so perfectly onto the modern corporate environment. We've all sat through those bloated, hour-long corporate all-hands meetings.
Oh, way too many of them.
Right. The CEO gets on stage or pops up on a Zoom screen and just starts walking through a 75-slide deck.
Complete with charts with overlapping circles.
Synergy buzzwords, mission statements that run for 3 paragraphs and literally mean absolutely nothing.
And by the end of the hour, if you turn to the person next to you and ask, hey, what is our actual goal this quarter? Neither of you would have a clue.
None. You have a list of action items, but you have 0 alignment.
You are given tasks, but you are starved of meaning. And Zinga applies this to his own environment by teaching his mentees a very specific rule for briefing senior officers in the military.
I love this rule.
It's incredibly pragmatic. He tells them, be bold, be brief, and be gone.
Be gold, be brief, and be gone. The bluntness of that is so good.
It really is.
But, I do want to push back on this framework a little bit for you.
Sure, go ahead.
Because I struggle with the be brief rule when it comes to truly massive operational shifts. Like, if I am a CEO overhauling a global supply chain across 12 different countries, or implementing a new AI infrastructure that changes everyone's daily workflow brevity, almost feels irresponsible.
That's a fair point.
Doesn't extreme structural complexity demand complex communication? Can you really condense a global supply chain overhaul into 3 sentences without just insulting the intelligence of your team?
Well, that is the exact trap that intelligent, highly capable leaders fall into. They conflate the execution with the purpose.
Okay, unpack that distinction for me.
Here the line Zynga is drawing. The execution of the strategy, the supply chain logistics, the software integration, the tactical realities of the Civil War, those are infinitely complex.
Right, you still need the manuals and the long meetings for the engineers.
Exactly. The tacticians need those details. But the purpose behind those mechanics must be radically simple. Lincoln didn't explain how to win the war at Gettysburg. He explained why the war had to be won.
Wow, okay. That's a huge difference.
And Zynga provides a diagnostic test for this. He asks his leaders, can your team repeat the vision under pressure? When the servers go down at 3 a.m., or when a major client threatens to pull out, can your team execute without you hovering over their shoulder?
Because if they freeze, waiting for you to tell them the next step, that's not a failure of their technical skill, that's a failure of your communication.
Precisely. If they don't deeply understand the core why, they cannot adapt to the how when the environment changes.
They just get paralyzed.
Yeah, they
Yeah.
become paralyzed by the complexity of the execution because they don't have a simple North Star guiding their decisions.
That distinction between execution and purpose completely changes the framework. So Lincoln mastered the how of communication by employing extreme brevity. But the true genius of the Gettysburg Address, the real reason it is a masterclass in leadership, is what he actually embedded in those 272 words. He didn't just summarize the war. He executed a massive ideological pivot.
And this is where we integrate Gary Wills' incredible analysis from his book, Lincoln at Gettysburg.
Such a good book.
Wills proposes a really fascinating thesis. He says Lincoln didn't just deliver a eulogy. In under 3 minutes, he pulled off a bloodless constitutional and moral revolution.
A revolution in 3 minutes.
Yeah. And the entire mechanism of that revolution hinges on the very first 6 words he spoke.
7 years ago.
Right. So let's do the math on that for a second.
Yeah.
A score is 20 years.
Okay, so 7 is 87 years.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And if you subtract 87 years from 1863, what year do you land on?
You land on 1776.
You land on 1776. You do not land on 1787.
And that is a massive, highly deliberate choice because 1776 is the year of the Declaration of Independence.
Yeah.
1787 is the year the United States Constitution was drafted. Lincoln deliberately chose to anchor the foundational identity of the nation to the Declaration, entirely bypassing the Constitution.
To understand why that is so revolutionary, we have to look at the legal and social consensus of the United States prior to that speech.
He was very different back then.
Oh, completely. The Constitution of 1787 was the supreme law of the land. It was a masterpiece of political engineering, sure, but it was fundamentally a compromise document.
Right.
In order to bind those disparate colonies into a single union, the framers made profound moral compromises, specifically regarding the institution of slavery.
They protected it.
They protected it, they built political representation around it through the Three-Fifths Compromise, and they legally insulated it. The Constitution, as originally written, did not explicitly guarantee equality. It was simply a framework for governance.
But the Declaration of Independence was a moral document. It explicitly stated, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal."
Yes. And before Lincoln spoke at Gettysburg, the prevailing view, and this wasn't just in the South, this was widely held in the North as well, was that the United States was a voluntary union of sovereign states bound together by a legal contract.
The Constitution was the center of the American universe.
Exactly. But Wills argues that Lincoln used those 272 words to shift the entire moral foundation of the country. By starting in 1776, Lincoln redefined America.
He asserted that the nation wasn't born from a legal contract in 1787, right?
Right. He said it was born from a moral proposition in 1776.
It's almost like a massive software patch for a corrupted operating system.
I love that analogy.
Think about it. If we view the original Constitution as the operating system of the country, it had a fatal flaw. The legal protection of slavery coded directly into its base architecture. Lincoln couldn't immediately rewrite that corrupted code, so instead, he pointed the system's underlying logic toward a pure foundational root directory, the Declaration of Independence.
He essentially told the country, this moral absolute is our true source code.
Yeah, forcing a system override that would eventually lead to the 13th Amendment.
That is a brilliant way to put it. He bypassed the compromised legal framework to invoke a higher moral authority. He declared that the United States was not a collection of states, but one single nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal.
He was in real time willing the country into a higher version of itself.
And It is important as we dive into these foundational texts, the Constitution, the Declaration, and shortly, the secession documents themselves, to clarify our objective here for you, the listener.
Yes, very important context here. Our goal in this deep dive is not to litigate modern politics or take ideological sides.
Not at all.
Our mission is to impartially examine how these specific military leaders and historians analyze the evolution of these ideals. We are looking strictly at the mechanics of historical leadership and how meaning is constructed.
And the meaning Lincoln constructed there wasn't just a rhetorical flourish. I mean, it was a lifeline. Zinga points out that even with its profound compromises, the Constitution actually contained a mechanism for its own repair.
Oh, in the preamble.
It's right there in the preamble. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union.
Right. It does not claim to have formed a perfect union.
Exactly. The founders embedded the acknowledgement of imperfection into the very first sentence of the law.
A more perfect union. That phrase is like an admission of guilt and a mandate for progress at the exact same time.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it's an acknowledgement of unfinished work. And that specific phrasing became the North Star for every subsequent movement for justice in American history.
Wow, yeah.
When the abolitionists, the suffragists, and later the leaders of the civil rights movement demanded change, they weren't asking to tear down the system.
No, they were holding the system to its own foundational promise.
Exactly. They were pointing back to the preamble of the Declaration and saying, you promised on paper to be moving towards something better. We are here to collect on that promise.
So Lincoln leverages the Declaration to remind an exhausted public of the ultimate goal, and he frames the grueling reality of the Civil War as a fiery trial to test whether any nation built on that specific goal can actually survive.
He calls it a struggle for a new birth of freedom.
Which really forces us to confront a very uncomfortable reality about leadership. Because to understand the immense pressure Lincoln was under and why he felt compelled to orchestrate this moral pivot, we have to look honestly at why the nation was tearing itself apart in the first place.
We have to look at the absolute core of the conflict.
And this is where Zinga's perspective as an information warfare commander becomes highly, highly relevant. Because he deals with data, with intelligence, and with threat analysis.
Right, he doesn't do spin.
No. He argues that leadership requires absolute moral clarity. And the foundation of moral clarity is an absolute refusal to sanitize your own history.
This is a critical point. Because for generations following the Civil War, a very specific historical narrative was systematically constructed. It is widely known today as the lost cause myth.
And that wasn't an accident?
Not at all. It was a deliberate, organized effort, heavily pushed by groups like the United Daughters of the Confederacy to rewrite history textbooks, to erect monuments, and to shift the narrative of the war.
The goal was to completely reframe the conflict, right?
Yeah. They argued that the South seceded over abstract, noble principles like states' rights or constitutional theory or even economic disagreements over tariffs.
Basically anything other than the defense of slavery.
Exactly. It was an attempt to heal white national unity by erasing the central, horrific reality of why the war was actually fought.
But Zinga, acting like a good intelligence officer, he just bypasses the post-war spin and goes directly to the primary sources.
You have to go to the source.
Right. If you want to know why a group of people took up arms to destroy a country, you don't look at what their grandchildren wrote 50 years later. You look at what the leaders themselves wrote and published at the exact moment they made the decision to secede.
And when you read the formal, legal declarations of secession drafted by the Southern states in 1860 and 1861, there is zero ambiguity.
Not at all.
They were remarkably, unapologetically clear about their motivations.
So let's look at the actual text provided in our sources here. The state of Mississippi, in its official declaration, stated, "Our position is thoroughly identified with the institution of slavery, the greatest material interest of the world."
It's right there in black and white.
Yeah.
They did not cite states' rights as an abstract concept. They cited the right to own human beings as a material imperative.
And Texas was just as blunt. They declared in their secession document that their state was established, and I'm quoting here, exclusively by the white race for themselves and their posterity, explicitly stating that the African race were rightfully held and regarded as an inferior and dependent race.
The rhetoric is breathtaking in its bluntness.
It really is.
And perhaps the most defining articulation of this came from the vice president of the Confederacy himself, Alexander Stephens. A few weeks before the attack on Fort Sumter, he gave what is known as the cornerstone speech.
What did he say in that speech?
Well, Stevens explicitly contrasted the new Confederate government with the United States. He stated that the founding fathers of the U.S. believed that the enslavement of Africans was a violation of the laws of nature.
Okay.
But Stevens proudly proclaimed that the Confederacy's new government was founded upon exactly the opposite idea. He said its foundations were laid and its cornerstone rested upon the great truth that, and this is a direct quote, the Negro is not equal to the white man, that slavery is his natural and normal condition.
They wrote it down, they shouted it from podiums. It was the explicitly stated bedrock of their rebellion.
Yes, it was.
And Zinga uses this undeniable historical record to pose a severe question for modern leadership. He asks, why would a nation or any organization commemorate individuals who committed treason and took up arms specifically in defense of human bondage?
Why erect statues to them in public squares?
Yeah, or name military bases after the generals who fought to destroy the United States. Linga's point is that every organization, whether it's a country or a corporation, reveals its true core values by whom it chooses to celebrate.
And he draws a very sharp, eliminating comparison to international norms here. He points out that modern Germany does not erect statues to the political or military leaders of the Nazi regime.
Right.
They do not celebrate the individuals who fought to destroy their democratic future and commit atrocities.
But they don't ignore it either.
No. They remember that history deeply, they educate every generation about it meticulously, but they choose to honor the victims, and they honor those who resisted the tyranny.
They use their public squares to elevate the values they want to carry into the future, not to glorify the architects of their darkest chapter.
Exactly.
Now, I can hear a listener raising a very common counter-argument to this. People often say, look, this happened over a century and a half ago, it's in the past, why do we keep dragging up the ugliest parts of our history?
That's a question we hear a lot.
Right. Doesn't focusing on these deep historical wounds just divide us further? Shouldn't a leader's job be to unite people and focus on moving forward rather than constantly looking backward at things we can't change?
It's a natural human instinct to want to avoid pain and seek harmony, for sure. But Zinga addresses this directly, and his response is foundational to how resilient organizations are actually built.
What does he say?
He argues that those who honestly confront the past are better prepared to lead the future. You cannot erase history. The historical truth remains, no matter how many plaques you hide or statues you remove.
But, and this is the critical leadership distinction, leaders choose which values and examples to elevate as the standard for future generations.
Exactly. If an organization sweeps its past failures under the rug, what happens to the culture?
It creates a culture of institutional denial.
Yes. If a leader pretends a failure didn't happen, they send a very clear signal to their team. Comfort is more important than truth.
Wow, yeah. Comfort over truth.
By confronting the ugly parts of history head-on, a leader demonstrates that the organization values truth, accountability, and the difficult ongoing work of improvement. Zinga's ultimate point here is that sanitized history doesn't build resilience, it builds fragility.
An organization that cannot look at its own flaws honestly will just shatter the moment it faces a real crisis.
Absolutely.
Sanitized history builds fragility. Think about how that applies to corporate leadership today. If your company has a history of a massive product failure or a deeply toxic workplace culture that resulted in a lawsuit, pretending it didn't happen doesn't magically fix the culture.
It just means you haven't learned the lesson.
Right. The underlying mechanics of the failure are still present, and you are almost certainly going to repeat the mistake.
Precisely. And to truly understand the mechanics of the failure of 1860, we have to look past the political rhetoric and examine the economic engine that was driving the conflict.
Yeah, let's get into that.
When Mississippi leaders referred to slavery as the greatest material interest of the world, they weren't being poetic. They were doing accounting.
Which brings us to the second book in our source material, Edward E. Baptist's The Half Has Never Been Told.
Such an important read.
If we want to understand why this system of human bondage was so fiercely defended that it tore a nation apart, we have to follow the money. We have to look at the economic reality that defined American capitalism at that time.
Baptist's book is vital because it completely upends a very common, almost comforting myth about American history.
What myth is that?
Well, the traditional narrative that many of us absorb in school suggests that American capitalism and industrialization developed on one track primarily in the free North, while slavery was this backward, almost feudal, economically inefficient system that existed on a completely separate track in the South.
Right. The assumption being that slavery was just an archaic institution that would have eventually died out on its own under the pressure of modern industrial capitalism.
Exactly. But Baptist systematically dismantles that assumption. He argues, using massive amounts of economic data, that slavery was not a backward system destined to wither away.
It was something else entirely.
It was a dynamic, highly adaptable, and brutally efficient economic engine. It wasn't separate from American capitalism. It was the very foundation of America's rise as a global economic superpower.
The economic statistics in Zinga's notes are staggering here. By 1860, cotton did not just represent a portion of the economy, it accounted for nearly 60% of all United States exports.
60%.
60%. That is a national economy utterly dependent on a single commodity, entirely produced by forced labor.
And Baptist meticulously traces how the wealth generated by that cotton did not stay confined to southern plantations. It fueled the entire national and global economy.
The industrialization of the North was heavily reliant on this system.
Oh, deeply. Northern textile mills needed cheap, abundant cotton to operate. Wall Street financiers grew incredibly wealthy, managing the massive flow of capital generated by the cotton trade.
And the financial instruments used, they are deeply unsettling to read about. Zinga notes that insurance companies literally wrote policies insuring enslaved human beings as property.
Yes. And major banks issued loans using enslaved people as collateral. If a plantation owner defaulted on a loan, the bank literally took possession of human beings.
That is just horrifying.
The entire financial apparatus of the United States was fully integrated with the institution of slavery. The industrial rise of the North was largely financed by the profits extracted from the Deep South.
But to keep extracting that profit, to keep feeding a 60% export engine, the system required constant, aggressive expansion.
Yes, it had to grow.
And this leads to an exploration of one of the darkest mechanisms of this economy, something Baptist calls the second Middle Passage.
When most people hear the term Middle Passage, they naturally think of the transatlantic slave trade, the horrific journey of kidnapped Africans across the ocean. But the second Middle Passage happened entirely within the borders of the United States. As the global demand for cotton exploded in the 19th century, and as the soil in the older Upper South states like Virginia and Maryland became depleted from tobacco farming, there was a massive economic shift.
A shift toward the new cotton frontiers in the Deep South.
Exactly. This resulted in the forced migration of nearly 1 million enslaved people. 1 million individuals were marched, often in chains, from the Upper South down into the Mississippi Valley, Alabama, and Louisiana, just to clear land and plant cotton.
It was a massive internal deportation.
Entirely designed to optimize labor allocation for maximum profit. Families were intentionally ripped apart, children were sold away from their parents, and spouses were separated forever simply because a ledger in a bank or a plantation office required more labor in a different state.
And Baptist makes a deeply controversial but entirely essential argument about how the productivity on those new cotton plantations was actually achieved. Because cotton production didn't just increase steadily, it skyrocketed exponentially between 1800 and 1860.
For a long time, economic historians looked at that massive leap in productivity and attributed it primarily to technological innovations.
Like the cotton gin.
Right. The standard textbook explanation points to Eli Whitney's invention of the cotton gin, or the development of new, hardier strains of cottonseed.
The narrative is that the machine made the process faster, so output went up.
Well, the cotton gin certainly processed the cotton faster once it was harvested. But the actual harvesting, the grueling work of picking the cotton from the thorny bolls, was still done entirely by hand.
There was no machine picking the cotton.
None. So, historians faced a mathematical puzzle. How did the amount of cotton picked per person, per day, increase so drastically over those decades?
What was the answer?
Baptist argues that the driver of this exponential productivity was not technology. It was a highly calibrated system of violence. He calls it the pushing system.
Let's break down the mechanics of this pushing system, because this is where the history directly intersects with modern management theory in a truly terrifying way. How exactly did they force that productivity increase?
It was a system built on meticulous data collection and targeted cruelty. Plantation owners and overseers systematically used violence, torture, and coercion to force enslaved people to pick more cotton every single day.
And they did it using metrics, right?
They did. They would weigh every individual's cotton at the end of the day and record it on a slate. That number became your baseline. If you picked 50 pounds on Tuesday, your quota for Wednesday was 55 pounds.
And if you missed that new arbitrarily higher quota,
You were brutally punished. You were whipped.
Mm.
The system was designed so that the only reward for hitting a target was an even higher, more impossible target the next day.
that is just chilling.
They used daily data tracking to optimize human suffering for maximum financial output. It was an infinitely scaling algorithm of pain.
That phrase, an infinitely scaling algorithm of pain, is haunting. And Zynga takes this historical reality and distills it into a very sharp warning for modern leaders. He writes, "Data without humanity is dangerous."
This raises an important question for anyone in leadership. When a leader becomes obsessed with productivity metrics, KPIs, and maximizing efficiency, but strips away empathy and human dignity in the process, they are walking down a very dark path.
If we pull on that thread and look at modern organizations, the parallels are uncomfortable. Obviously, we are not comparing modern corporate jobs to the unimaginable horrors of chattel slavery. That is absolutely not the point.
No, of course not.
But the mindset, the management philosophy of treating human beings merely as data points in an optimization algorithm is incredibly pervasive today.
It really is.
Think about modern algorithmic management. We see fulfillment centers where workers are tracked by the second, scanners record their every micro movement, they are penalized by an algorithm for taking an extra 30 seconds in the bathroom.
They are forced to meet constantly shifting picking quotas.
Yeah. And if they fall into the bottom percentile, the software automatically triggers a warning or a termination.
Or consider the corporate practice of stack ranking, where a company systematically fires the bottom 10% of its workforce every year, regardless of overall performance.
Just firing the bottom 10% no matter what.
Right. It creates a cutthroat culture of fear and paranoia, all to squeeze out a marginal increase in quarterly profits. Zynga is challenging leaders to look at the systems they are building. What are the hidden costs of your organizational success?
Are we inadvertently institutionalizing cruelty simply because the spreadsheet says it's more efficient?
Exactly. Evil rarely looks like a cartoon villain twirling a mustache. Often, evil looks like a perfectly optimized, data-driven system functioning exactly as it was designed, but completely devoid of human empathy.
So leaders must examine the architecture of their systems, not just the behavior of individuals within it.
That's exactly right.
Which brings us to a massive moral and practical dilemma. If you are a leader or an employee and you realize that you are operating inside an institution that is deeply flawed or corrupted by unethical systems, as the United States clearly was in the mid-19th century, what do you do?
It's the ultimate question.
Do you abandon the institution because it is tainted, or do you stay inside it and fight to fix it?
This is not just a theoretical question. It was the exact bitter debate happening among abolitionists in the decades leading up to the Civil War. It was a fundamental rift over strategy, morality, and the nature of the Constitution itself.
And Zynga highlights this debate, right?
Yeah, he highlights this by contrasting two towering figures of the era, William Lloyd Garrison and Frederick Douglass.
William Lloyd Garrison was a prominent white abolitionist, the publisher of The Liberator, and he really represented the radical wing of the movement.
Garrison was uncompromising. He looked at the Constitution, he saw the Three-Fifths Compromise, he saw the Fugitive Slave Clause, and he concluded that the entire document was irrevocably tainted by its protection of slavery.
He had a very famous quote about that.
He did. He publicly called the United States Constitution a covenant with death and an agreement with hell.
Wow.
He believed that you could not fix a system that was built on a rotten moral foundation. His strategy was essentially secession from the moral compromise.
He literally burned copies of the Constitution in public.
He advocated that the free states should separate from the slave states, effectively abandoning the institution of the United States because it was too corrupt to save.
But Frederick Douglass took a remarkably different path. And it's vital to remember that Douglass had actually been enslaved.
Yes, that context is crucial.
He had borne the physical lashes and the psychological trauma of the system Garrison was only writing about. Yet Douglass's philosophy evolved in a completely different direction.
Douglass initially aligned with Garrison's view, but as he deeply studied the little text of the Constitution, his strategy shifted. He realized that the Constitution, despite the intentions of some of its framers, never actually used the word slave or slavery. He looked at the Three-Fifths Compromise and realized it could be interpreted not as an endorsement of slavery, but as a penalty on slave states, reducing their political representation compared to if they had freed their population.
And he looked at the preamble, "We the people," and argued that the people meant all people, regardless of race.
Exactly. Douglas concluded that the Constitution did not need to be destroyed. It needed to be weaponized for liberty.
Weaponized for liberty. I
Yep.
like that.
He began referring to it as a glorious liberty document. He believed that if you abandoned the legal framework of the nation, you abandoned the enslaved people trapped within it.
So his strategy was to stay.
To hold the nation to its own highest stated ideals, and to demand that the Constitution be amended to finally fulfill the promises made in the Declaration of Independence.
He chose to leverage the institution against its own flaws. And as Zinga points out in his notes, history completely vindicated Frederick Douglass and Abraham Lincoln.
It absolutely did.
They did not abandon the Union. They forced it through the unimaginable crucible of the Civil War to emerge as something closer to its original promise.
The direct result of that strategy and the immense sacrifice of the war was the passage of the Reconstruction Amendments.
The 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments.
Right. The 13th Amendment permanently abolished slavery. The 14th Amendment established birthright citizenship and guaranteed equal protection under the law.
And the 15th prohibited the denial of voting rights based on race.
Exactly. Yeah. On paper, these three amendments fundamentally transformed the architecture of the United States. They effectively closed the legal gap between the compromises of the Constitution and the moral absolutes of the Declaration.
On paper. But as any leader who has tried to change a corporate culture knows, constitutional or policy progress moves incredibly fast, while institutional and cultural change moves agonizingly slowly. Passing a law is a moment in time. Changing the lived reality of millions of people is a generational grind.
Which is why Zinga uses the phrase "a long struggle" in his article, literally stretching the word out to emphasize the timeline.
Right.
Because the passage of those amendments was just the beginning. It took nearly a century of relentless, often bloody effort to make the promises of those amendments real.
It required fighting through the violent backlash of Reconstruction.
Enduring the systemic oppression and terror of Jim Crow laws and mobilizing millions during the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 60s, the ideals were finally enshrined in law, but the reality on the ground was still deeply hostile.
But the crucial point is that the legal framework established by those amendments created the space for that long struggle to happen.
Yes.
It provided the legal leverage. And that initial wedge of equality eventually cracked the door open for everyone else, expanding legal protections for women, Hispanic Americans, Asian Americans, LGBTQ Americans, and countless others.
And Zinga provides a very stark personal example of this delay between policy and reality from his own domain, the United States Navy.
This part is so powerful.
It is. The 15th Amendment, which guaranteed voting rights regardless of race, was ratified in 1870. But it took 74 years after that amendment passed for the U.S. Navy to finally commission its first African-American officers.
The Golden 13.
The Golden 13. Commissioned in 1944, right in the middle of World War II.
74 years.
It took 74 years of waiting, of proving themselves, of fighting against systemic exclusion before those 13 men were allowed to break that specific barrier and wear the gold stripes of naval officers.
And this is where Zinga's notes transition from historical analysis into something deeply personal and profoundly moving. Because Bob Fabian Zinga is not just a historian writing from an ivory tower.
No, he's living this history.
He is an African immigrant. He immigrated to the United States from the Republic of the Congo. He navigated the system, became a naturalized U.S. citizen, and eventually rose to the rank of commander in the United States Navy.
He is the living embodiment of the legacy of the Golden 13.
He really is.
And he reflects on the moment he raised his right hand to take his oath of office as a naval officer. He writes that he was fully aware of the history we just discussed.
But he emphasizes that when he took that oath, he was not swearing allegiance to the compromises of 1787.
No.
He was not swearing to defend a system that once viewed people who looked like him as property.
He swears an oath to the amended Constitution, the expanded Constitution.
Yeah.
The document that was battered, tested, and pushed closer to his ideals by the blood, sweat, and sacrifice of generations of Americans like Douglas, like Lincoln, like the Golden 13, who refused to abandon a flawed institution.
Commander Zinga stands there as living proof that the work of perfecting the Union is not a myth. It is an ongoing, tangible reality.
To summarize this entire philosophy of leadership, Zinga includes a quote from Jay-Z in his notes, and it perfectly encapsulates this generational handoff.
What's the quote?
Jay-Z said, Rosa Parks sat so Martin Luther King could walk, Martin Luther King walked so Barack Obama could run, and Obama's running so we all can fly.
So what does this all mean? That is such a brilliant distillation of the concept of stewardship.
It really is.
True leadership isn't about ensuring that the organization achieves absolute perfection during your specific tenure. It's about accepting that the institution is flawed, taking the baton, running your leg of the race as hard and as ethically as you possibly can, and passing it to the next person in better shape than you received it.
It is the embodiment of the proverb, true leadership is planting trees whose shade you know you will never sit in.
Lincoln planted trees at Gettysburg.
Frederick Douglass planted trees through his advocacy.
The Golden 13 planted trees by breaking the color barrier in the Navy.
And Zynga acknowledges that he is sitting in the shade of their sacrifices, and he recognizes his profound obligation to plant new seeds for the generations that will follow him in the military and in the cybersecurity sector.
Great leaders do not demand flawless institutions before they agree to serve them. They accept the unfinished work.
They accept the unfinished work. That is the absolute core of it all.
The unfinished work that Lincoln challenged the crowd with at that cemetery in Gettysburg wasn't just a mandate to win the Civil War. It was a continuous, open-ended mandate for every generation and every leader that follows.
It is a mandate to reconnect your people to a clear purpose when the world around them is chaotic.
It is a mandate to communicate with bold, undeniable clarity.
It is the requirement to have the moral courage to confront the ugly, systemic failures hidden in your own history without flinching.
And ultimately, it is the willingness to do the grueling, unglamorous, often unrecognized work of stewarding your institutions toward a more perfect reality.
It requires deep humility.
Yeah.
You have to recognize that you are just one part of a continuum. You aren't the beginning of the story, and you won't be the end. You are simply the steward of the present moment.
And that brings us to our final thought for today's deep dive. We've spent this time talking about the vast forests planted by those who came before us, by Lincoln, by Douglass, by the Golden 13, and by millions of unnamed individuals who pushed against imperfect systems. But I want to turn this directly to you, listening right now.
Think about your own context.
Yeah, think about your own sphere of influence today, in your company, in your community, or even in your own family. What is a specific seed that you are actively avoiding planting simply because you know the ground is hard and it's going to take far too long to grow?
That's a tough question.
What is the uncomfortable truth in your own organization or the deeply entrenched, maybe even toxic system that you are uniquely positioned to challenge? Even if you know you will never get the credit and you will never personally enjoy the shade that tree eventually provides.
The diagnostic waters of leadership will always be murky. The X-ray will never give you a perfectly clean line.
The systems will always be flawed, but that imperfection is exactly where the real work happens. That is your unfinished work. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.
All right, that's the podcast for today. I don't see any question in the chat. So as we end today's podcast, I want to let everybody know I have decided to start a fourth newsletter on LinkedIn. Right, I already have one, which is leadership. My leadership newsletter. I have one called ETC Emerging Tech Cyber Security. So that's the newsletter I use for everything emerging tech. And then I also have one Friend in the Spotlight. That's when every week I select a member of my growing network and I highlight all of their achievement. So now I'm going to start a fourth one called Black History Month. And I think this is going to be so much fun. I thought I had, here we go. Black History Month. Actually, I'm going to call this Black History Year. So since Black History Month this year, 2026, almost every day I've had at least a post celebrating Black History. And I felt like 28 days is just not long enough. So I've been doing this pretty much every day. So now I am going to index all of those posts into the brand new Black History Year newsletter. So if you would please subscribe to that one, and every day going forward, I should have a brand new article, and they're all going to be located in that one location. So for today, for Black History Year, we are going to be highlighting two things. The first thing I want to highlight, I really didn't know this. It is quite amazing. I mean, there is so much in our history, but did you guys know that actually our public school were actually architected by African American after the end of the Civil War? African American architected public education in the American South. That's pretty big. There would be no public school in the South if it wasn't for African American. White Southerner wouldn't get access to public school if it wasn't for African American. So one of the greatest and probably least known, I know I didn't know that until last week, achievement of Reconstruction really was um, sorry, was the creation of the first state-funded free public school system in the American South, designed primarily by African American leaders in South Carolina. That was in 1868. This was more than an education reform, right? It was a true revolution. After the Civil War, formerly enslaved people understood that freedom without education would never be enough. And across South Carolina, Black community established freemen school in churches, military camps, and abandoned buildings, often funding them with their own scarce resources, alongside support from the Freedmen's Bureau and Northern Missionary Society. So in 1868, African American delegates formed the majority of South Carolina Constitutional Convention, and they drafted Article 10, establishing a uniform tax-funded public school system open to every child, including the children of their former enslaver. Isn't that amazing? Wow. I didn't know that. A few names that should come to mind, people like Francis Cardozo. He really had a really huge impact on that. And another one is Robert Small. You probably remember him when I wrote the article about the Golden 13, where the Golden 13 actually trained, right, at um, RTC Great Lakes. It was segregated, and where the Golden 13 Trend was named after him. So, again, this is really a true American hero, the Civil War hero who liberated himself by commandeering the CSS Planter, championed compulsory education so children would not be forced into labor instead of classroom. And another hero I need to highlight is William J. Whipper. He was an attorney, union veteran, advocate. He advocated a universal, publicly funded education and believed integrated school could help eliminate racial prejudice. So, three American hero, all African American: Francis Cardozo, Robert Small, and William Whipper. All right, and you can go to again my LinkedIn post and you can read more about them. Now, the other thing I want to highlight today from Black History Month is this man here. I think everybody should know who this person is. This year is Gabriel Tockley. He's the very first, I believe, really the Black. He used to be a slave, he became free, but then he earned reparation for his family. Now, in this country, we have talked for such a long time. We need to have reparation for the gravest crime against humanity, right? All of the African American that were enslaved in this country, their descendants need to get reparation. Right, we've done reparation for pretty much everybody, for the Jews, for the Japanese, for the Native American, on and on and on. We do reparation, but for the gravest crime of all humanity, America hasn't done so yet. But this man is really my hero, Gabriel Coakley. Remember his name? He got reparation for his family. History remembers many who fought slavery with speeches or on the battlefield, but one remarkable African American defeated an unjust system using something equally powerful: wisdom, strategy, and courage. So Gabriel Coakley lived from 1825 to 1898. He was a free Black entrepreneur in Washington, D.C., who transformed America's slave laws into a pathway to freedom and generational opportunity for his family. He was a successful oyster merchant once he became a freeman. Coakley used his earnings to purchase the freedom of his wife, Mary Garloway, his sister, and other relatives. Like many free Black Americans, he did not immediately complete the costly legal process of manumission, right? Although his loved one lived as free people, the law still recognized them as his property, as slaves. Then history changed. On April 16, 1862, President Abraham Lincoln signed the D.C. Compensated Emancipation Act, abolishing slavery in the nation's capital. And ironically, the law compensated slave owners, not the enslaved. Again, this is another great injustice. Why in the world are you going to compensate the evil slave owner and the slaves that you've used and abused? You're not going to give them anything. Okay, you are free now. Just figure it out. I mean, that is crazy, isn't it? But history changed there because Coakley recognized a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Using the ownership document he already possessed, he petitioned the federal government as the legal owner of 8 members of his own family. His claim was approved. The government awarded him back then $1,489.20, which is worth more than $170,000 today, while permanently securing his family freedom. Wow. So this is really the first African American who did get his reparation from the evil of slavery. And now we just need to wait for our government to do that for all of the children of all of the enslaved people in this country. What a moral blight and a shame to our nation's history. But what is even more, out of his lineage, there is one descendant I do need to highlight. And that's, let me see. Hold on a second. Man, there is so much to learn about history. That's exactly why I have started this new newsletter, right, about African American history. Because there is another member of Oakley's family I would like to highlight, because his legacy endures even through generation. Because including his great granddaughter, her name was Dr. Lina Francis Edward. She became a pioneer physician, and she received the Presidential Medal of Freedom for her humanitarian service. Wow. Can you imagine that? So it definitely changed the entire future of his generation, his children. So I'm going to play a couple of video highlighting those. And again, you can go back to the post I posted today, and later today there should be a single article in my brand new newsletter, Black History Year. I hope you would subscribe to that one. So wherever you are watching this podcast, whatever platform, please like, subscribe, and forward that to at least 2 or 3 of your friends. And I hope I am adding value to you. Tomorrow, I will not have a podcast, but I'm going to come back Friday, and I am going to have the pleasure of speaking to the one and only Mildred Talabi. She's a best-selling author of Start Being Visible, women's business coach, helping people build a business around your expertise without leaving your day job. She's a 4-time author, a speaker, former journalist and communication leader, and she has... also, I think she's connected to almost 60,000 people on LinkedIn. So she's very, very popular. She's doing great work, and I'm really looking forward to speaking with her. So that's it for now. But just to end the show, the Gettysburg Address, I think, by President Abraham Lincoln really changed the history of America. Today, as a Black man, I would not be a commander in the most powerful U.S. Navy in the world, a commanding officer, a senior officer in the Navy, if it wasn't for that speech, if it wasn't for the golden 13 on whose shoulder I stand. Wow. That Declaration of Independence, it really means a lot. All men are created equal. All men. That includes women too, and that includes African American as well. All men. So there is still a gap between our aspiring value from the Declaration of Independence and then our lived reality, even today in 2026. And it is your job and my job to close that gap. Help us make America, like President Clinton says, a more perfect union. Wow. He says that we have highly resolved that this dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, and for the people shall not perish from the earth. And that's the America I believe in. That's the America I am willing to give my life for That's the America I joined the US Navy to support and to defend. Okay, thanks again for watching, and I hope to see you on Friday when I speak to the one and only Mildred Talabi. Bye for now.
Public education is a resource many Americans may take for granted, and you may not know African Americans were a driving force in establishing the school system as we know it now.
In tonight's Black History Month Minute, Mike Powell with the Alachua County NAACP and the Divine Nine tells us about the beginnings of public schooling after the Civil War.
Did you know that formerly enslaved Black Americans were the actual creators of public school education in the United States? Today, let's learn about the true architects of public education, which was launched during the post-Civil War Reconstruction period. Black politicians during the Reconstruction era played the most critical role in the creation and development of the U.S. public school system. After the Civil War, during the Reconstruction period, 1865 to 1877, newly freed African Americans, along with some white allies, made significant strides in establishing educational infrastructure, particularly in the South, laying the groundwork for the public education system we recognize today. Here are some key ways Black politicians and activists influenced public education during that time. The creation of public schools. Before Reconstruction, formal education was often inaccessible to Black Americans, especially in the South. Black politicians advocated for the establishment of public schools for all children, regardless of race, leading to the founding of some of the first public school systems in the southern states. In 1868, the first state-funded public school system in the South was established in South Carolina, which then served as a model for other southern states. The Freedmen's Bureau. The Freedmen's Bureau, which was established in 1865, was instrumental in supporting education for formerly enslaved people. The Bureau helped to establish schools and recruit teachers for Black children, and many of these schools were foundational in creating a public educational system for Black communities in the South. Black legislators in southern states. During Reconstruction, African Americans were elected to state legislatures in southern states, with some even holding positions in Congress. These legislators pushed for laws that supported universal public education. For example, in South Carolina, where Black legislators had a significant presence, they helped pass laws to create a statewide system of public schools. Legislation such as the Civil Rights Act of 1866 and the 14th Amendment laid the foundation for equal educational opportunities, mandating that all citizens, regardless of race, have access to public education. However, these efforts faced significant opposition from Southern whites, leading to a variety of challenges, including underfunding, segregation, and violence against Black educators.
Civil War actually received reparations. Can you tell a little bit of the story of Gabriel Coakley?
Gabriel Coakley, beginning in the early 1850s, started to free his family. He was already a free man and a successful businessman. He sold oysters. He was somehow able to, pull together enough money to buy his family's freedom. Washington, D.C. had a big population of free people, free Black people, who also lived right next door to enslaved Black people, including some families. And so his wife, his sister, their six children were all still enslaved. So he began to purchase their freedom, courageous enough. And then in 1862, Abraham Lincoln said, we can't be in the midst of the Civil War demanding freedom for enslaved people, and in Washington, D.C., there are still slaves. So he signed the Compensated Emancipation Act of 1862, which freed the enslaved people in the district, but it also paid off the enslavers, saying, hey, it's reparations for slavery. So the federal government, for the first time, paid reparations for slavery, but for white enslavers. And so I'm looking at this list, 1,000 names. The most powerful people, the founder of the Willard Hotel, the founder of Griggs Bank, the sitting secretary of the Supreme Court, a key advisor to Lincoln, all this was getting paid for their lost property. And out of nowhere, this name, Gabriel Coakley, pops up, a Black man. Is paid reparations. He found a loophole. Because there was still slavery in the district, he never registered his family as free people. And so technically, they were still his property. And so he was able to get reparations. It was Gabriel Coakley, but also 5 other names of black people. A woman who purchased her husband, someone else who purchased her son when he was just a boy. And so we wrestle with this idea of what it would have meant, what could have been. And what we see through the family line of Gabriel Coakley, doctors, lawyers, deans of colleges, savvy business, someone who won the National Medal of Freedom.
Wow. It's a story of what the power of economic enfranchisement.
And that's when he's full access to the fruits of America.
Gabriel Coakley, this man who mysteriously acquired his own freedom, who built up enough wealth to free his family.
Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom over me. And before I'll be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave.
Free at last, free at last, free at last. And God Almighty, I am free at last.
Free. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom. Freedom. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom over me. Over me. And before I be a slave, I'll be buried in my own grave. And go home to my Lord and be free.
Thank you for tuning in to the Leadership and Success Podcast with your host, Coach BZ. If today's episode added value to your leadership journey, be sure to subscribe, share, and join us again for more wisdom nuggets on how to lead better and achieve greater success. Remember, leadership is the most critical skill of our time. The world will always need leaders to inspire others, drive innovation, and execute meaningful strategy. So why not count yourself among the bold leaders shaping the 21st century? Until next time, stay inspired, stay committed, and keep leading with excellence.